Syria, the crime and the criminals. The Syrian civil war, insurrection, rebellion, revolt, uprising, call it what you will, was not homegrown in Syria by Syrians with differing outlooks as to how their nation should be governed, as the mainstream media would have you believe. It was part of a strategy pre-planned by vicious sociopathic foreigners led by these so-called neocons who took it upon themselves to decide what was going to happen in the Middle East to suit the agenda of the United States for what they called their project for the new American century, reduced to the rather dissonant acronym PNAC, and closely allied both in sound and purpose to IPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Unashamedly hell-bent on ensuring that the natural resources of other, lesser nations remain under American control, quite openly, in a document titled Rebuilding America's Defenses, released in September 2000, these conspirators let it be known that their plan would be much easier to carry out were there to occur a catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And, lo and behold, on September 11th, 2001, such a catastrophic and catalyzing event occurred. An event which was blamed on 19 box-cutter-wielding Middle Eastern men led from a cave in Afghanistan by Osama bin Laden, a former CIA asset, the name of whose suddenly prominent terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda, was actually coined by the CIA and simply means the list, or the database, a pretty terrifying appellation, you have to admit. And what an amazing coincidence that just when a new Pearl Harbor was needed, along one came, in spades. So do such huge coincidences happen in real life? Well, they do if you believe in fairies and what the mainstream media tells you.
The U.S. is 90% certain that bin Laden was responsible for today's attack.
Bin Laden's Al-Qaeda organization has to be right at the top of the list.
Right now, suspicion focuses on Osama bin Laden, but first things first. The FBI is combing the wreckage for evidence.
But what they found was never identified. 4 planes, 4 murder weapons were allegedly hijacked by this man's accomplices that day. But the NTSB failed to forensically identify any of the wreckage using serial numbers or any other methods. And although information from these devices has been made available, their serial numbers are missing. Furthermore, most aviation experts agree that few experienced pilots could have flown the New York and Pentagon planes, if there actually was one, with such precision. And not one of these men held a big passenger jet pilot's license. On the other hand, these men, along with foreign entities such as Israel's Mossad, had the power to orchestrate Operation Northern Vigilance, the war game that was scheduled for that fateful day, to confuse and delay reports coming from air traffic controllers, and, most importantly, to have previously acquired the remotely controlled aircraft that were almost certainly radar swapped for the ones that were allegedly hijacked. Do I have any proof for all this? Well, I have as much proof for the scenario I've just put forward as the United States government had for its version. To be precise, no proof whatsoever. But I didn't have a budget of $15 million, nor the clout to call witnesses from the FBI and the NTSB, nor the services of the Commission's Executive Director, Philip Zelikow. Hang on, we've seen him before, haven't we?
Ain't he one of them neocons?
He is also one of them dual Israeli-American citizens, and his book is a travesty, full of unsupportable findings, accusations, and hearsay. It is devoid of any real evidence whatsoever. But what I do know, almost beyond a shadow of a doubt, is that no devout follower of Islam would have done what bin Laden was accused of doing, knowing the vengeance that the US was bound to wreak on the first Islamic nation that came to mind. And it seems that award-winning director Adam Curtis of the BBC was thinking along the same lines.
Even bin Laden's displays of strength for the Western media were faked. The fighters in this video had been hired for the day and told to bring their own weapons. For beyond his own small group, bin Laden had no formal organisation. until the Americans invented one for him.
So it looks as though Osama bin Laden couldn't have done 9/11 even had he wanted to. The burning question is, if Osama bin Laden didn't do it, who did? Here's a clue.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the joint staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know."
But it was no laughing matter for the Iraqis, as the United States, aided by Britain and the rest of the coalition, totally destroyed the infrastructure of one of the world's earliest civilizations, killing over 1 million people, maiming or otherwise destroying the lives of countless others, and plundering Iraq's priceless historical treasures. But Iraq wasn't enough for these vicious psychopaths. The neocons wanted more.
So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Sounds a bit like a shopping list, doesn't it?
"Oh, honey, while you're at the Pentagon, would you mind destroying these countries for me?"
And that is exactly what the United States proceeded to do. After Iraq came Libya, the destruction of a relatively stable nation led by a benevolent dictator who would not bow to outside pressure. So Gaddafi had to go, and the US and NATO saw to it that he did. And while unrest was being stirred up in the other countries on the neocons shopping list, Israel's Prime Minister was screaming for America to attack Iran for allegedly doing what Israel had already done in 1968, build a nuclear bomb. Iran may have been last on the list, but make no mistake, the seeds for the Iraq War, the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, and the ongoing conflict in Syria were sown in this document, released almost exactly 1 year prior to the events of September the 11th, 2001. Never mind its contents, the title is an outright lie, because its intent and purpose was to make Israel the predominant power in the Middle East, using the might of the United States military machine to that end, sacrificing millions of non-combatant lives in the process, as well as the lives of thousands of Americans, while the Israel Defense Force stayed at home to harass, torture, and otherwise punish the Palestinians and anyone who dared to stand by them, whose land they had begun to steal way back in 1948, and which they continue to do to this day. These are but a few of the sociopaths who calmly drew up a plan that was destined to cause so many deaths and so much suffering to so many other human beings. Dick Cheney, former US Vice President and businessman. Check out Halliburton, Dick Cheney, and Wartime Spoils in the video notes. John Ellis Bush, brother of former President George Bush. As governor, Jeb Bush declared martial law in Florida 4 days before the 9/11 attacks. Now, why would he have done that? Donald Rumsfeld, former Secretary of Defense. The day before the 9/11 attacks, Rumsfeld announced that $2.3 trillion of the Defense Department's funds could not be accounted for. On 9/11, Rumsfeld was working in a section of the Pentagon opposite to the impact area. I say, Donald, what a stroke of luck. Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense at the time of 9/11. No need to wonder where his loyalties lie, then, now, and forever. And didn't he just love the 9/11 Commission report? Philip Zelikow, the man responsible for the fictionalized 9/11 report. A former member of the Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, in 2002, Zelikow is said to have publicly stated that Iraq was not a threat to the United States, it was a threat to Israel. No surprises there, Zelikow is a dual Israeli-American citizen. John Bolton, former Under-Secretary of State and former United States Ambassador to the United Nations. Bolton is a fierce Israel apologist and defender. Dov Zakheim, former Under-Secretary of Defense. He is widely thought to have been the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks. From 1987 to 2001, Zakheim was CEO of SPC International, a high-tech firm heavily into aircraft remote control technology. Zakheim is an ordained rabbi and dual Israeli-American citizen. Elliot Cohen, Professor, Nitze School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, member of the Defense Policy Board, and of course a member of the Project for a New American Century. So ask yourself, which of these two entities was more likely to have carried out the 9/11 attacks? A group of highly motivated insiders who admitted that they needed a catastrophic and catalyzing event to kickstart their plan for a new American century, strike that for Israel to dominate the Middle East, or for this man with his raggle-taggle band of hired freedom fighters to risk the wrath of the mightiest military machine that the world has ever known, to use his alleged attack on the United States as an excuse for them to decimate the Islamic world on Israel's behalf. Whatever your answer, there was a kind of reverse parallel to this last August, about a poison gas attack against civilians in Syria. The choices being, was it more likely that A, the Syrian government was responsible, or B, was it more likely that the foreign-backed rebels were responsible, hoping that their false flag attack would trigger an escalation that would bring the United States directly into the conflict? Here's a clip from a video I made at the time showing just how preposterous it would be to choose A. Benjamin Netanyahu was able to tell his partner in war crimes just what he needed to hear. The absolutely, without question, no doubt at all, genuine, 100% verifiably true information obtained by the Israeli Mossad, motto, by way of deception, thou shalt do war, that Bashar al-Assad was guilty of gassing his own people in a situation where the Syrian leader knew that the United States Navy was poised on his own doorstep to take action if he did anything so stupid as to gas his own people while the United States Navy was poised on his own doorstep. But, according to America's top government officials and military brass, that is exactly what the Syrian leader did, and that is what they are telling Congress and the people of the United States. Never mind innocent until proven guilty, that's only a legal technicality, just as it was 12 years previously when Osama bin Laden was found guilty without due process for the 9/11 attacks. Later, we had reports of Saddam Hussein's non-existent weapons of mass destruction, clearly detailed by Colin Powell to the United Nations.
With this track record, Iraqi denials of supporting terrorism take their place alongside the other Iraqi denials of weapons of mass destruction. It is all a web of lies.
Just who was telling the lies we would later find out. And at around the same time, Prime Minister Blair was busily telling very similar ones to members of the British House of Commons.
That he has existing and active military plans for the use of chemical and biological weapons, which could be activated within 45 minutes, including against his own Shia population, and that he is actively trying to acquire nuclear weapons capability.
Sound familiar? Well, it should, because when Iran needed putting in its place, these purveyors of lies and half-truths had a field day, helped along by WikiLeaks. Out of 250,000 allegedly stolen documents, they all homed in on anything that had to do with Iran's so-called nuclear threat. The BBC. No need to read out the headlines, but in the body copy we find they include reports of some Arab leaders, including Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah, urging the US to attack Iran and end its nuclear weapons program. CNN was singing much the same song, but favouring the word anxiety rather than concerns. Australia's ABC News ran with this headline, but gave no date or proof of authenticity. Then we had Reuters quoting The Guardian, which referred to these repeated calls by King Abdullah, but I missed capturing the Independent's contribution because this link didn't work. But the essence is quite clear from the first few words. Israel says Arabs agree on Iran threat. Well, what do you know? On the other hand, I could have read the London Times leader on WikiLeaks by paying £1 for the privilege, an offer I found quite easy to refuse, but the free-to-read effort by the New York Times certainly made up for what I may have missed with this provocative headline and picture. Around the world, distress over Iran. And the irony is that the New York Times headline writer is quite correct. There is distress over Iran, distress at the way it has been cast in the role of the evildoer, when all but the most ignorant observers realize that it is nuclear-armed apartheid Israel that is the real threat, not Iran. We've all seen the tragic results of the lies that were spread about Iraq and Libya, two of the nations singled out for regime change by the Pentagon warlords, and here are some of the people they have been financing in pursuit of the same result in Syria. This video shows rebels or foreign fighters about to behead 3 people. The reason given, those being killed were guilty before Allah and deserved death. The victims were identified as Christians. The rebels seem to be having a nice day out in the countryside before they carry out their grisly task. This happened on Sunday, June 23, 2013, and one can't help but wonder if John McCain's newfound Al-Qaeda friends were among the participants. As we've already seen, it was shortly after 9/11 that regime change in Syria appears to have been ordained.
Starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
So there is no reason whatsoever to believe the rhetoric about President Assad's oppressive regime, which started long before the conflict escalated into the human catastrophe it has now become. Looking at this kind of devastation, who could begin to apportion blame for any single act or action without a proper inquiry? And wouldn't the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff be aware of what General Clark has already revealed? Yet he can still say,
They've reached the point now where Assad is using chemical weapons as just another military tool in his arsenal.
Which, of course, Bashar al-Assad denies. But what about this guy? One of Dempsey's staff, perhaps? Does his reaction signal the same conviction? Let's have another look.
Just another military tool in his arsenal.
He doesn't seem too convinced to me. And just listen to this.
And I'm able to, with some integrity, with a lot of integrity, I hope.
The most powerful military officer in the world felt it necessary to pre-defend his integrity. And, not surprisingly, he's getting a few more funny looks. Perhaps his staff had been reading some of the same material I've come across. Filling out the headlines, the UN report on Syria was based on witness accounts taken outside of Syria. Humanitarian concerns about dressing up the military conquests of Syria by Tony Cartalucci. The article begins, November 28, 2011. Wall Street and London's media machine eagerly churned out headlines like BBC's Syria security forces commit crimes against humanity, announcing the conclusions of a recent UN Human Rights Council report regarding the ongoing violence in Syria. However, upon reading the BBC article, it is soon discovered that the investigation team members say they were denied entry into Syria itself and that the entirety of their evidence is garnered solely from interviews with 223 victims, witnesses, and also army defectors to investigate alleged human rights violations. In the writer's opinion, this is not an investigation, nor is the information provided within the report evidence by any stretch of the imagination, but a one-sided exercise to provide the worst possible image of the Syrian government as told by opposition groups, now on record, fully armed, foreign-backed, and trying to seize power by force. So why should independent researchers be listened to, rather than the mainstream media? Once again, retired General Wesley Clark provides some answers.
Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. These people took control of the policy in the United States. And I realized then, it came back to me, a 1991 meeting I had with Paul Wolfowitz. You know, in 2001 he was Deputy Secretary of Defense, but in 1991 he was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. It's the number 3 position in the Pentagon. And I had gone to see him when I was a one-star general. I was commanding the National Training Center. I had met him one time. He said, if you ever get to Washington, come look me up. They always say that. Well, I was there in Washington. It was a Friday afternoon. I'd visited Colin Powell. He'd given me 5 minutes of his precious time and sent me on my way, and I was bored in the Pentagon, and I thought, I'll just go, who can I see? I think I'll see Wolfowitz. So I called, and up there he was available. Scooter Libby came to the door. I met Scooter for the first time, and he brought me in, and I said to Paul, I said, and this is 1991, I said, Mr. Secretary, you must be pretty happy with the performance of the troops in Desert Storm. And he said, well, yeah, he said, but not really. He said, because the truth is we should have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein, and we didn't. And this was just after the Shia uprising in March of 91, which we had provoked, and then we kept our troops on the sidelines and didn't intervene. And he said, but one thing we did learn, he said, we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. He said, and we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes. Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us. And I put that aside. It was like a nugget that you hold on to. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. It went back to those comments in 1991. Now, did anybody ever tell you that? Was there a national dialogue on this? Did senators and congressmen stand up and denounce this plan? Was there a full-fledged American debate on it? Absolutely not. And there still isn't.
And there never will be until decent Americans are prepared to stand up and do something about it, because already this has virtually come to pass. The rise of Zionist Jewish influence and power within the United States began in earnest with the establishment of AIPAC in 1963, and today it virtually controls almost every facet of American politics. The bottom line is, if a U.S. citizen is not prepared to demonstrate their allegiance to AIPAC and Israel, then they might just scrape through if a ballot for municipal dog catcher was held, but they'd never get any further than that. And Zionist Jewish influence at the United Nations is no less effective. This list from September 1972 to February 2011 of United Nations Security Council resolutions critical of Israel were all vetoed by the United States. And while we're on the subject of the United Nations, this video is the reason I began this project in the first place.
Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, I'm sorry to... can you just wrap up? Because you have spoken only 20 minutes, longer than 20 minutes.
Mr. Secretary, you spoke 25 minutes. I came here after 12 hours in the aeroplane.
Yeah, I know you have a lot to speak.
Few minutes to end my speech. Yeah. This is Syria.
How much do you have left now?
I think 5-10 minutes.
Oh, no, it's not... Can you just, I will give you another, opportunity.
No, I can't divide my speech. I must continue.
You have already...
What else were they in Geneva for? Shopping? Delegates from 40 countries attended that conference, but the United States managed to prevent Syria's ally, Iran, from attending. And now Ban Ki-moon wants to gag the Syrian delegate. What a disgrace. So let's examine just why and how the tragic Syria situation has come about. The famous American Declaration of Independence includes these immortal words. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And here are a few truths with regard to the Syria situation. Syria was one of the Middle East nations selected by the neocons as a target for regime change as early as 1991. The likelihood of Osama bin Laden having carried out the 9/11 attacks are virtually zero. Therefore, 9/11 was almost certainly a false flag operation, the catastrophic and catalyzing event needed as an excuse to kickstart the neocons' project to make Israel the dominant nation in the Middle East. The Syrian conflict was instigated and continues to be financially supported by the United States of America, almost certainly with the connivance of Israel and Saudi Arabia, and quite possibly other nations. It is also blindingly self-evident that America's support for a very small nation in the Middle East, Zionist Israel, is way out of proportion to the interests of its own population, as well as to the interests of world peace. When it comes to dealing with international conflicts, which lead to massive loss of life, horrendous injuries, and millions of human beings losing their homes and everything they hold dear and being turned into refugees, the United Nations is an outrageously expensive lame duck and its Secretary-General America's and Israel's lackey. And speaking of lackeys,
this is what this conflict is about.
Here are a whole bunch of them. Congresspersons and senators applauding the leader of a nation that the United States supports unconditionally. And I make no excuses for repeating a section of a video I uploaded in March 2012. That one was about Iran, but now Syria is coming under the knife. So only the nation has been changed, but the innocents are still suffering. To understand the consequences of this craven grovelling, hearken not unto Netanyahu's words, rather look upon some of his nation's recent deeds and juxtapose them with the almost unanimous approval of the United States Congress.
Zaytun, flattened by Israeli bulldozers. But in this house, they'd herded 100 members of the Samuni clan. And then they shelled it, killing 49 of them.
Gaza, white phosphorus, dropped on a civilian population causing death, blindness and other horrendous injuries. May 2010, murder in the Mediterranean. The attack on the Freedom Flotilla attempting to break the illegal siege of Gaza. Out of a multitude of nationalities on board the Mavi Marmara, 9 men, all Turkish, were gunned down in what must have been targeted assassinations. 19-year-old Furkan Dogan, an American citizen of Turkish descent, was shot once in the chest and 4 times in the head. The mind boggles at this disgusting display of sycophancy, demonstrating the utter disregard for the plight of the oppressed Palestinians in favour of a rabid group of people who claim special privileges of remembrance, both emotional and financial, for what they claim the Germans did to their forebears. And much of the rest of the so-called civilized world is awash with influence-peddling Zionist organizations, well-funded and staffed by public relations fanatics, who would have the rest of us believe that the world owes Zionist apartheid Israel a living above and beyond all others. The Chinese are very much into symbolism, and one of the first films I made in Hong Kong, I can't say directed because you can't direct fish, was for the Independent Commission Against Corruption, in which the peace and tranquility of the Aquarium Society was disrupted by its greedier members who were taking more than their fair share of things. But by getting rid of the greedy ones, things returned to normal. This is analogous to Israel's walk over everyone else in their hobnail boots attitude in the Middle East. But there is no equivalent of Hong Kong's ICAC to stop them, quite the contrary. There's a growing number of pro-apartheid Israel organizations hell-bent on backing them up. Of course, they don't mention the apartheid bit, but if you want a huge laugh, just look up the manifestos of some of these organizations. The European Friends of Israel seems to be based in Belgium, but it doesn't look as though any of its members have been to Israel. Otherwise, they might have left this off their website. Know what I mean? Its leader is someone named Michael Gure, and it is now the biggest organization of its kind in Europe, gathering 1,500 parliamentarians and policymakers who are friends of Israel, from the European Parliament, the 27 national parliaments of the European Union, and from 20 national parliaments of the Council of Europe. No wonder he looks so smug, but just listen to the vision statement. EFI draws its members together to increase understanding, to deepen the relationship between Europe and Israel, to expand and reinforce European support of Israel, and promote democracy, peace, and dialogue in the region. Give me a break. The large membership of your organization has to be the result of bribery or coercion. Just as it is in America and Britain, very few people can retain any kind of representative position in Europe unless they are prepared to turn a blind eye to the appalling way that Israel behaves towards the Palestinians and many of its neighbors, including right now helping to train foreign mercenaries to fight against Syria's legitimate government. So is there anything that we, the unchosen, can do about all this? Well, I received an article not so long ago that provided much food for thought. It was sent by the staunch activist and editor of My Catbird Seat, Debbie Menon, and was written by another fierce defender of the Palestinian cause, photographer and writer Stuart Littlewood. And the beauty of it is that much of what is required is already in place. Boycott, divestment and sanctions. This is your big chance. In the coming elections, boycott would-be MPs who are friends of Israel. Name and shame supporters of the racist regime. This time, BDS needs to mobilize locally and nationally to challenge election candidates robustly on their membership of Friends of Israel. Please follow the link in the video notes, but the main thrust of the article is that party leaders deserve to be clobbered hard until they disband their sinister apartheid support groups. Inside the British Parliament, these are the Conservative Friends of Israel, the Liberal Democrat Friends of Israel, and the Labour Friends of Israel, heavily lent on from the outside by the Jewish Leadership Council, the Zionist Federation, and the Board of Deputies of British Jews. But the next important elections will be for the European Parliament to be held in all member states between the 22nd and 25th of May 2014. That's not far off, but it should be long enough to suss out which candidates are members of any Friends of Israel type organizations so that you can vote for someone else. Simple, really? Well, maybe not all that simple, but the alternative will be more of this, and this, and this. So please, just do the best you can, for the sake of your own humanity.